Hello and welcome back to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth series. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project. It's a pleasure to have you with us today on Monday, June 12th. Our topic today is artificial intelligence. I'm sure that's something you've all been hearing a lot about lately, ever since last year when the ChatGPT program was released. We've been hearing an awful lot about artificial intelligence, both how it's going to do some wonderful things for us and other sort of less optimistic scenarios being floated. But we also want to talk about what exactly is it? I mean, this term has just sort of been thrown out there, and I think a lot of people really don't have a clear understanding of what exactly it means. I know I didn't have a clear understanding of what it means either until, a couple of conversations ago. And we're very fortunate to have in with us two folks who are going to be the best people I can find to unravel exactly what artificial intelligence is really all about. We're really pleased to have with us today Mike Cole, who is a retired engineer and used to be a coach with the Manchester Machine Makers, a robotics team based here in Manchester. And we also have with us Isaac Fernan, who's a member of the Manchester Machine Makers and a student at Burton Academy. Mike, Isaac, thank you very much for making the time for this conversation today. Really great to have you here. And I guess, just to kind of get us started on this, Mike, let me start with you. What is artificial intelligence exactly? I mean, and there's a couple of different divisions within it, it sounds like. There's more than just one basic box with artificial intelligence.
Yeah, sure. And that's a great question. And it's one that you could probably ask any number of different experts, which, by the way, I'm not an expert, and I think Isaac's probably going to say he's an informed person, but maybe not yet an expert, although I think he will be eventually.
Expert in training, okay.
That each of those people would probably give you different definitions of exactly what artificial intelligence is. But the most common one that I can wrap my head around is that they describe it as a capability written in a computer program that's running on a computer hardware system that accomplishes many of the same tasks that humans could. That is, in all likelihood, it is learning and it's improving its capability to do that through the process of doing that over and over again. So it's not merely taking an input, processing it, and producing an output, but instead it's improving its ability to produce ever better outputs based on it learning from the match between the outputs produced and the outputs desired. So it's a learnable, and you're going to hear that phrase a lot, training and learning an AI algorithm. That's the process of taking those outputs and either manually or completely without any human involvement, the algorithm improving itself to produce ever better results.
To add on to that, the AI usually produces or imitates intelligent results. For example, there was the Turing test that was used in the past to try to distinguish between what was technically considered artificial intelligence by if you could distinguish its response from that of a human. Most of the current artificial intelligence that we're seeing use something called neural networks, which roughly imitates that of a human brain, and it has a net of nodes. Each node is a little computing unit, and through the learning that it does with its data set, it'll adjust the weights in between the nodes to get a better model of what it's trying to achieve. And we usually split AI into three subgroups. There's artificial narrow intelligence, which is what we're seeing right now. Those are the image recognition programs on your Tesla or ChatGPT. There's artificial general intelligence, which can encapsulate a lot of areas. That would be an AI that can do everything that a human does. And then there's ASI, or artificial superintelligence, which exceeds the level of that of a human.
Now, what is generative AI? That's a term I keep hearing a lot, and I think ChatGPT is an example of that. That's when you give a program some prompts, and it comes up with a response of some sort, either some kind of term paper, for instance, or some kind of response. Is that?
That's a great description of it. So the generative word means that it is generating output based on the prompts that you have given it. It could be conversational. So ChatGPT is giving you a chat-like conversation that it has generated out of the prompts and directions that you've given to it. It could have been a different sort of generative algorithm. Maybe it was going to be a molecular generative algorithm. So it's going to take, based on some number of prompts of molecular combinations that you're looking for, and it's going to fabricate through its processes and through its artificial intelligence algorithms, it's going to come up with novel and innovative combinations of those. So generative means literally that it's taking the grammar that you've given it as its training, and it is generating potentially vast, huge amounts of outputs with that.
Another example of that would be for a crossword AI, one that takes an array of squares and you can give it a word list of things that it can fill in, and it could create from that information a crossword puzzle. So you give it an input of words and an array, and then it gives you some kind of synthesized information from that.
Interesting. Now, artificial intelligence isn't really a brand new thing, right? I mean, this has been something that's been lurking in the background anyway for quite a while. Am I correct on that? Or because it sometimes seems like this just sort of popped out of a bubble sometime last year, and all of a sudden is taking over Silicon Valley or whatever. But I mean, this is something that the roots of this technology go fairly well back.
They do, yeah, back into the 1950s. And so a level of public attention that gets placed onto it, as well as even funding, public and private funding, has waxed and waned through the years. What's been dramatic here in the last 6 or so months, certainly less than 12 months, has been this organization, OpenAI, making available the ChatGPT, and with the GPT-3 and then the GPT-4 algorithms, the level of capabilities that are there advancing so quickly and to such a threshold that it's sort of at present course and speed trajectory basis, this is going much further and much faster than had been expected to. So the technology or the terminology of artificial intelligence goes back to the 1950s. The research and development has gone on for all the decades then since to now, but there were some key milestones that happened in the early 2000s, 2010, 2012 timeframe that started the pathway to where we are now, which is, as with the most current ones, GPT-4 that we hear about so much.
Even with respect to the public access to AI, I think since it's been around for a decent amount of time, there have also been tools available to create these models for a decent amount of time. For example, on edX a couple of years ago, I took a course on programming these AI through Harvard. That's where I did that crossword AI. There was also one where you used TensorFlow, which is another toolkit, to create an AI that recognizes German street signs and tell you if that's a 70-mile-per-hour street sign, or it would be kilometers per hour, or 10 kilometers per hour. And you're also getting in ChatGPT an easier way for the public to really interact with these AI, I'd say, because to make those AI, you need some level of programming knowledge, some level of familiarity with the technology. Whereas with ChatGPT, you can just write in a text prompt and get something out of it. So it's at a level where the layperson can put something in and
which actually, I would add to that idea, because I agree with what Isaac's saying, that it is hugely beneficial to the public that ChatGPT has been released and that it has been discussed and is getting the attention that it is, because I think it's causing many, many more people to realize that AI is something that needs to be looked at and needs to be talked about, not just among computer scientists, but also among social scientists, among humanitarians, around human rights. The definitions of law and justice are going to be potentially changed. The rights of man are all, everything is up in the air here now with the advent of an ever-increasing intelligent resources.
So I guess I just wonder, what do you guys see as the upsides and downsides of this? Or what people should be thinking about as we contemplate a world where artificial intelligence becomes a bigger part of, how we just go about our day-to-day business.
I think that very much depends on what kind of artificial intelligence you're dealing with. With the narrow intelligence we're currently dealing with, we want to make sure that we're reducing the biases in the data sets. We've seen that especially with models like ChatGPT, and also with some medical models and other related like AI models in the workforce, that human bias towards racial groups or towards anything that we have bias towards gets ingrained in those model sets when they're trained, and then it just never leaves them. So that's something we need to watch out for. We also, I think you spoke to this a little bit earlier, need to watch out for misinformation among these artificial intelligence models, especially with the rise of being able to create fakes of videos and of people saying things that they haven't necessarily done. With artificial general intelligence, that's when we really come into jobs being replaced. And with artificial superintelligence, that's when everything could get replaced.
It's up for grabs, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so there's a lot of AIs that are around us today. I read something this last week that said that in the United States, the best estimate that this person was writing was that about 25% of U.S. businesses use artificial intelligence today in their enterprise to some degree. And we all as consumers see it because we interact with electronic devices, maybe with voice-based recognition that's using the pattern matching and recognition that are in our voices, or it's fairly widely available. Or in the example that Isaac also made before of limited or fully autonomous self-driving vehicles, those types of artificial narrow intelligence are pretty widespread. And in many, many cases, they're very beneficial. They are solving problems that are either unsolved or not easily solvable, and they're doing them pretty reliably and making that capability more widespread. So artificial narrow intelligence probably, as long as, to Isaac's point earlier, things around fairness and equity are ensured, ANI is a good thing for all of us, subject to those equity type and privacy constraints. As you start getting into this larger area then beyond that, where it's this artificial general intelligence, then that's where it's potentially something that people's jobs could be changed. Another thing that I had read had said that, and I think this was a paper written by Goldman Sachs, that globally something like 300 million jobs could be subject to displacement through AI over the next, I forget the time horizon they were looking at, 8 years or something like that, out of a worldwide employment population pool that I forget what number that they used for that, but it was a large number. And so while there will be some displacement, there will definitely be perhaps just as much creation of new AI jobs. Think of AI as sort of the development of fire. Well, prior to the development of fire, we didn't need fire extinguishers. We didn't need fire brigades. We didn't need fire regulations. But we also didn't really know how to reliably get something hot to cook the food, or in Vermont to be able to stay warm through the winter. But I don't think any of us want to live without it. I think we need fire, and in the same way, there will come to be new jobs that are going to be basically oversighting jobs to regulate, to ensure that AI doesn't go beyond the limits, that it's following the constraints, the human value constraints that we would set for it. I think there's going to be whole new realms that don't exist today, such as that our lawyers and our attorneys will be creating new fields of basically AI law, so that the rights of humans are not compromised in the age of AI. And this will be something that will take a lot of thought, a lot of writing and reading and discussion. A lot of humanitarian work is going to have to be done to basically forge this new ground. Perhaps even there will be another 10 rights that get added to the U.S. Bill of Rights, such that in the age of AI, maybe there need to be 10 more rights now that we have the existence of these kinds of intelligences that are there. And this is all getting into that realm of artificial general intelligence. When we go beyond that to this third category that Isaac and I are talking about of artificial superintelligence, this is where it starts becoming a little bit more worrisome. Think of from my example here, that we're talking about the evolution of humans. If we assume that from my discussion, and assume that we're going to talk about humans have evolved capabilities over time, that they technologically advanced, they developed things. They learned how to make and transport fire. They learned how to make wheels and axles. Technological change happened along the way. There was nothing other than evolutionary advantage that was, the cultures that could produce those technologically advanced things would flourish and would expand and multiply, and the cultures that could not would not expand as rapidly and perhaps might even wither away. As we get to this era, with all of these, the intelligence is what is driving all this, but the intelligence that's important that I want to draw attention to can lead to emergent capabilities. For example, there's nothing in kind of the evolutionary advantage scheme that says that mankind should go to the moon. There's nothing evolutionary advantageous about that, and yet somehow we had this evolving capability that came out, or an emergent capability that came out, that used our intelligence that's there to devise and develop ways, harnessing physics, to be able to get people from the surface of the Earth to the surface of the moon and back again. And that's an emergent capability. It conceptually is an idea that could also happen in artificial superintelligence. Once we've given a capability to algorithms to improve themselves, as they begin discovering the realm of the physical and the logical and the kind of the cyberspace of feasibility, we really don't know what they might, where their emergent capabilities might go beyond. And at the end of that all, some super intelligence, this is kind of where the fear comes in. It might, in its evaluation of its goal function, which is do the best job you can, it might say, well, I could probably do a better job if I took all of the atoms that are in these three individuals and just rearrange them into some other formation of atomic energy I'm going to use for my own purposes. And so, poof, we're suddenly gone. And that, an artificial general intelligence might not do that, but an artificial superintelligence with an emergent capability set, that for me is where I would get concerned.
So I agree with a lot of what he was saying, and I want to kind of work backwards from the artificial superintelligence. The ability to improve on itself is something that is really going to quickly advance the intelligence from a general intelligence to a superintelligence. Right. So that's expected to happen extremely quickly. And from that emergent capability standpoint you were talking about, I think we need to be very careful with how we arrange its reward set. When you think of the standard models we're using, I'm going to go to a chess AI. You would have board sets weighted at different values, and it would get a reward if it gets to a better board. Let's say winning the game, getting checkmate, would be a 1. That's what it's trying to do. Every game position it's getting up to that point might give it higher and higher board values, so it would be optimizing the reward. The 1 would be the cookie for the AI. And for the superintelligence, we want to make sure that we're optimizing what we want its reward to be and what it's trying to do in such a way that its emergent capabilities aren't going to hurt us. And because of that, we need to slowly develop the framework on what we want this to be built on. For the job replacement in general AI, I think we could also relate it to automation, because that replaced a lot of blue-collar jobs, but over time, the workforce adapted to it, and we saw a lot more higher-level jobs. For example, the engineers that are building the robots, rather than the people that are lifting the pallets. Right. So I think in that way, it's not necessarily harmful to have the jobs be replaced. We might see an enhancement of the jobs and more higher-level jobs being introduced to the workforce, as long as we're being adaptable.
Some of the constraints, adding to what Isaac is saying, because I think he's right on the money with what he's talked about so far. Some of the constraints that can be put in place through regulation could be, for example, at the artificial general intelligence level. You can think of it as, one example might be, well, if we're concerned about the losing of jobs, and it would be potentially through this technology change shifting things so much towards automation through an AGI, maybe we need to use, and I'm going to call it a robotics tax, so that as robots are brought online, and to the extent that they're having some sort of negative job effect, then to that same extent, there is essentially a tax being charged, whether it's based on the value of the goods produced or based on the cost of the equipment that's going in, or whatever the unit of value is, that's something that would essentially tax that to capture a portion of those AI-generated savings or AI-generated profits to capture a portion of those to go towards the retraining of workers that were otherwise displaced. So some countries actually do this to a limited extent right now. South Korea is probably one of the best examples where they have a huge amount of productivity gain that they have accomplished through technology advancement, so much so that I think in 2017 they enacted legislation that now discourages overinvestment in technology advancement so that they can basically kind of keep somewhat of a governing mechanism limiting the amount of further AI or further technology change to a rate that their society can work with. So there's ways to bound this. If you start going beyond, AGI then and into the ASI, into the superintelligence realm, you're now starting to get to where it goes beyond national boundaries. This is not just a uniquely American problem, and it cannot be just a uniquely American solution either. And this is where a discussion needs to start taking place at levels beyond just the North Shire about, as we start looking to countries, multiple countries, researchers across all of these multiple countries, sharing their information, collaborating so that they can start identifying what are the ways that we can monitor when it's beginning to an intelligence explosion is one of the terms that's used, when it goes beyond the level of containment that we've seen in an artificial general intelligence, and it has started with emerging capabilities vastly greater than we actually can do anything to stop or slow down. So this would be the kind of the realm where countries need to view this as a global problem and to work collaboratively, and that means first technically working together, and then legislatively basically writing laws that would be the principles and practices, and ultimately that means global enforcement as well. Anything that threatens the human existence ultimately has to be something that is protected for all of humanity, not solely at a single country's boundaries.
But isn't it going to be difficult to have all the countries in the world kind of unified around that idea? I mean, I think in the abstract, yes, but countries have different national interests from time to time. Might there not be one country that would perceive an advantage to, like, saying, well, yeah, you guys do whatever you want, but we're going to focus on our thing here to kind of enhance our national interests? Isn't it? It just seems like it's going to be very hard to achieve some kind of unity of agreement, or across 200 nations in the world, that we need to slow down and do this properly, otherwise
it is very hard to imagine. It is. I agree with you totally. It's very hard to imagine. So ultimately, if we believe that this is going to be difficult to prevent from breaking out and having an AI, basically an intelligence explosion that is potentially existential for humankind on Earth, if we believe there's any degree of risk of that, then we need to find some possible ways that can scale that back down. And it's hard for me to believe that any one country has all of the brains and that the other brains in the world are not going to be working to solve this. That if we don't collaborate, first technically to share what we know, so that then our humanitarians around us, our legislators around us, can then start trying to work with what's been exposed through the technology and start finding ways to codify and verify at the same time kind of these metrics of breakout. And then ultimately it's going to have to be those countries that are prepared to enforce that as well. So the United States, Europe, China, Russia, all of them have just as much exposure of risk and just as much exposure of gain. So it's really going to have to, I can't imagine, short of saying the inevitable breakout is going to happen, it's merely a matter of time until artificial superintelligence takes over.
Isaac, let me ask you, your generation is going to be grappling with a lot of these issues, more so than mine. But I guess what are your peers when you guys talk amongst each other when you talk about artificial intelligence or AI? What do you tend to think about it? Is it a promising technology, do you think, or is it something to be kind of a little bit paranoid about?
Well, there's definitely a lot of potential in the narrow algorithms, especially. Among my classmates, of course, there's a lot of buzz about ChatGPT and how, oh, we can get an outline for this project and brainstorm much more quickly than you could before. You don't have to spend 30 minutes trying to think of an essay topic. You just plug something into a model and it'll give it to you.
I should have had that when I was in high school.
So it's definitely useful in a lot of the tools that it brings, especially because the AI can kind of get around coding for a problem by just telling it, oh, optimize for this, figure it out yourself, rather than having the programmer do it, which allows for the public, the high schoolers, to have access to a lot more models that can give you essay prompts and topics. Or just the other day, I was using AI for image styling. I had an identity project for an AP language project where I took a photo and I styled it in a certain way so that it looked hand-drawn, which is something I never could have drawn on my own. And of course, I went through my teacher and made sure, oh, this is a proper use of the artificial intelligence, right? And everything was improved. And through that way, the project was significantly enhanced. So it can definitely be used to make learning and schoolwork better as long as the academic guidelines are in place. As far as the more general intelligence, I'd say that they have about as much of idea of it as the general population does, just a looming, like, vague thing that they don't really know what's going to happen. Of course, no one wants to be ruled over by an AI overlord, but there's a lot of potential as well with what could be done if it's implemented correctly. And there's also a lot of potential with these narrow algorithms that we currently have.
The other thing I would encourage being discussed, by students with their parents and parents with their school boards and then with their schools themselves, is that the model of years past of the subject that were going to be taught at school, the goal for many of those students was so that they could go to college. It was to be a cognitive skill that they were going to be developing in school so that they could go to college to further a cognitive skill and to go into a really cognitively focused profession. That future is going to have a cognition that is using artificial intelligence. For some individuals, there won't be as many positions available in those realms anymore as there were. There'll be new positions perhaps, but some of those cognitive intensive fields are just not going to be there in that kind of eventuality. I would advocate a lot for students, and I think this is sort of a act local, think global issue. Each student has to be responsible for their own education, and each parent has to be responsible for their child's education as well. But it's not to wait for the school or wait for the school board or wait for the State Board of Education to define things or what are going to be the recipe you need for your education. Instead, taking personal ownership that my education is my responsibility or my child's education is my responsibility, and maybe in addition to all the cognitive things that they're going to be learning, maybe it would be wise and beneficial that they double track themselves to develop skills in a trade, something that is not going to be cognitive exclusively, but something that will have sort of a creative, practical physicality to it that is just really beyond the realm of what artificial intelligence, as is envisioned, is going to be able to do. So I would encourage that.
I would also encourage them to know when an algorithm is influencing them or trying to influence them in some way. For when you go through YouTube, whenever you finish a video, a new one will pop up. It'll have a bunch of recommended videos. For Google, whenever you type something in, it'll have recommended results. There's a lot of these recommendation algorithms that's always trying to keep you engaged with something, trying to cater to you in a way that'll keep you with the platform. But you really want to know when those algorithms are taking place so you can respond appropriately rather than just being sucked into what's in the company's best interest rather than the individuals.
All right. Well, there you have it. Thanks again, everyone. We'll see you again the next time.